Welcome back into another edition of the PowerMizzou.com podcast, YouTube Live. However, you may be consuming this. It is Thursday afternoon after the bye week. Missouri football returns facing Oklahoma this weekend. Welcome into our weekly Yuengling preview show brought to you, oddly enough, by America's oldest brewery, Yuengling. It is a night game at Faurot Field on Saturday, 6:45. So that gives you plenty of time to stop at a local establishment, which may have Yuengling on tap, maybe a store where you can get the famous green bottles, cans, whatever you want to do. Pick up some Yuengling, take it to Faurot Field at some point Saturday afternoon. As always, we encourage you to enjoy responsibly, but certainly enjoy leading up to Saturday night. The Oklahoma Sooners making their return to Columbia, first time in, I believe, 14 years. We are going to welcome in Collin Kennedy from Sooners Illustrated, the Oklahoma site on the 24/7 network. Collin, how you doing, man? I appreciate you taking a minute.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, and I'm a big fan of Yuengling for sure. I think folks on both sides might need a few of those to get through this game, the way it's looking, and I think this is the longest stint between meetings Oklahoma, Missouri in the history of the series. Last time was 2011, so I'm excited the game is back, and I'm excited to talk some ball with you, man.
So let me ask you, just by appearances, because we're meeting everybody new here for the first time really this month at 24/7. By appearances, I'm going to guess you are significantly younger than me and don't necessarily remember a whole lot of those OU Mizzou games that 2011 and before.
I'm 28. I'm 28 going on 29. So I remember a decent amount of them. And being from the Dallas area as well, Missouri, the days of old, whether it was Chase Daniels, so on and so forth, Missouri has been a program that I've been pretty familiar with. I actually took a college visit up there back in the day and got to check out campus, Faurot Field, and all that stuff. Very close to potentially going there, ended up going to OU. And so Missouri, I was really excited that these games are coming back because it was definitely a big part of my childhood coming up in college football.
Yeah, what's the general OU fan thought on this? I mean, it's not exactly a rivalry because I don't know the exact numbers, but like I remember 77-0, the Norman Conquest. So I grew up where it was you had your team in the Big Eight, but then you also either chose Oklahoma or Nebraska because you knew one of them was going to win and both of them were going to brain your team at some point between September and November. But are Oklahoma fans generally excited about this, or is it more, hey, awesome, we're in the SEC, you know, whether it's Arkansas, LSU, Alabama, and oh yeah, Missouri's one of them too?
It's funny you bring Nebraska up real quick because speaking of rivalries and the perception of it, obviously that's the debate going into this game, right? Is this a rivalry? Is it not? All of my mom's side of the family basically went to Oklahoma or Michigan, but all my dad's side went to Nebraska. So the OU-Nebraska rivalry is one that I think a lot of people reference. But I think your view of this game is kind of shaped upon what you actually define a rivalry to be in college athletics. If you're someone who's like, history, tradition, the stakes, however long those two teams were at their best when they were playing each other, all that stuff, then yeah, I don't know that you're on the side that views this Missouri-Oklahoma game as a rivalry. But if you're someone who maybe views it as just pure animosity, social media riffing, for lack of a better term, but also I think that there's a lot of relevance here because of geographical ties, recruiting background, so on and so forth. And also, I think as the new look SEC kind of separates into some brand new tiers, for lack of a better term, these two, whether Oklahoma fans want to admit it or not, are essentially tied at the hip. So I've been kind of, and curious for your take on all of this as well, but I've kind of likened it in a sense to the way that like Texas has Texas A&M and Oklahoma, but they also have Arkansas as a perceived rival as well. I think that's kind of the OU Missouri dynamic, whereas Oklahoma maybe has the Red River game, Bedlam, even the Nebraska rivalry of old. But without Bedlam, Gabe, and obviously without the Nebraska game as well, I think that Oklahoma fans, some specifically, are very excited because this could kind of replace that meaningful matchup that has kind of been vacated on the calendar.
Yeah, Missouri fans, I mean, the Arkansas thing's been kind of forced on them since they joined the SEC.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't really feel. It's more of a rivalry in basketball, in my opinion. Their best series have honestly been with South Carolina and Kentucky since they joined the league. But I think Missouri fans are happy to have a game against a team that, hey, it's familiar. There's a lot of fans have a lot of reference points. Most of them not good, but this one kind of seems to have, like, this year. It has a little added significance because I'm sure Brent Venables talked not only about Luther Burden, who was obviously committed there for a while, but Caden Green, Theo Weiss. There's some connective tissue here, and oddly, I mean, I know JJ Hester is at OU and used to be at Missouri, but I think more of it has gone from Oklahoma to Missouri than the other way around.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Missouri has found a way to win a lot of battles, and that's kind of obviously created some of the social media sphere that you see today. Williams Nwaneri, he wasn't asked about the former five-star that Oklahoma loved. Lamont Rogers, OU was basically in the final two, now currently committed to the Tigers, even though obviously another round of recruiting for him
Right.
headed down the stretch. Lamont's a guy I've gotten to know really well, and I know that he was basically down to those two. There's a lot going on here behind the scenes with these two programs, and Brent would never admit it, but I do think that the way I kind of look at it, rivalries aren't necessarily always about what has been, but what could be. And I think what we're seeing these two evolve into is what's kind of making this such a important game, not just now, but into the future for these two programs. They have a lot of connections, whether they want to admit it or not. And I was thinking about this earlier too, Gabe. Like, I still remember Brent being like this week in the press conference, hey, not a lot of animosity between the staffs or whatever else. But then at one point in the offseason, almost all of OU staffers were tweeting out a picture of Curtis Lofton playing against Missouri whenever something had gone out at the time. Yeah, man, like there's some juice here. And I think Brent Venables recognizes that fact.
I'm curious which one of those, because I have a feeling based on the social media interaction when it happened, I know the answer to this, but if it's Burden, it's Weiss, it's Caden Green, which one of those events kind of most, for lack of a better term, pissed Oklahoma fans off and maybe make them want this one a little bit more than they would have otherwise?
It's Caden Green without even a slightest bit of hesitation, man. I mean, Luther Burden to me was kind of different in that obviously he had committed to the Lincoln Riley, Dennis Simmons staff back in the day. But then, I mean, he made a very justified decision at the time to stay close to home. I wrote a little story about him this week. I don't think anyone really blamed Luther Burden for sticking around. Theo, I don't know if you caught the press conference this week, Gabe, but Theo was brought up and Brent was like, I'm proud of him. I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
Like, he wanted more opportunity. We had a hard time getting him the ball, and he's panned out the way we expected him to. I don't think there's really much animosity there at all. It's Caden Green, when you hear the stories behind the scenes, that I think definitely kind of fortified the rivalry style relationship between these two.
All right. So I know what Vegas says about this game. I have set the over-under in this game at 3.5. I think if one team can get two safeties, they might win this game 4-0. Look, I know Brady Cook is listed as questionable. I personally don't think we see Brady Cook. I think Drew Pine starting for Missouri. That hasn't been a great thing for Missouri. He has 3 points in 15 drives. The Oklahoma offense will dive a little deeper into it, but big picture, you haven't heard very many coaches just come out and say, I can't remember the exact term anymore, but it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Basically, we're just a mess on offense is what Venables said. Has it gotten better? And I know it's injury partly, but is it all injury?
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little bit better. To what degree and what degree will actually be seen on Saturday, which I think we'll dive into a little more. I don't know what the case will be considering some of the stuff we're getting ready to talk about, but I do think it's getting better. Now, for those that maybe aren't necessarily familiar, Oklahoma made the decision to move on from Seth Luttrell at offensive coordinator. They made the choice to promote who's now the interim play caller in Joe John Finley. He was the co-coordinator with Seth. He's now the primary guy making the decisions up in the box. And then Kevin Johns is the new quarterbacks coach, at least for the time being. Now, why I want to bring that up, I think that those moves specifically have helped a lot because OU's dealt with a lot of injuries to this point, and that's not going to not be the case this Saturday. But Gabe, I think what was important, and I brought it up at the time whenever we did the instant reaction thing, it was hard to gather my thoughts because I was exhausted. But that was an important move, and I think it's come to fruition a little bit because Joe John comes from the veer and shoot tree, which comes from the Art Briles family and all of that. And that system was what Jackson Arnold specifically was recruited to play before Jeff Lebby moved on and took the head coaching job at Mississippi State. Seth Luttrell was not a veer and shoot guy. He was kind of what I call like the flex air raid, where he comes from the Leach tree, but he played fullback at Oklahoma, so he wants to run a lot of inside zone. I think that they've improved a lot because they're running things that are a little bit more familiar to their starting quarterback. And sometimes comfortability is the quickest way to get some sort of positive result. And so I think it's definitely gotten a lot better over the last few weeks, but that's also relative to how much you actually think they've gotten better, considering they're still struggling on offense.
Right. Joe John Finley, another kind of connection between these two schools. He was here briefly but before he moved on. So let's kind of go through the three issues here. I mean, running back has been largely fine. Let's start at the most important one. I guess quarterback is fully back to being Jackson Arnold, but for Missouri fans who maybe haven't followed this, can you give us the just quick thumbnail sketch of this season at quarterback? And do they still think Jackson Arnold's what they thought he was a year ago, when from outside it looked like they were like, yeah, Dillon Gabriel, if you want to take off and go to Eugene, that's fine.
Yeah. So Jackson Arnold, former 5-star, former National Gatorade Player of the Year, played at nearby Denton Guyer High School, which is a really storied program in Texas high school football. Like, basically, I bring that up to say the context was this guy's going to be really freaking good. And Oklahoma was kind of put in a place to where they needed Dillon Gabriel. They got him at the last minute, but they also had to basically say, hey, we've got a guy waiting in the wings that needs to be the face of the program. And Dillon Gabriel was also in a place where he was like, I want to move closer to home, play for a high-level contender, and they ended up parting ways. So Jackson Arnold takes over. Everyone's thinking he's going to be one of the young faces of SEC quarterback play, right? Maybe one of the more promising young talents, and then it just doesn't go that way. They make a late switch to Michael Hawkins, who is a true freshman quarterback. His dad played at Oklahoma. He was a cornerback at under Bob Stoops. So Michael Hawkins steps in. He's a guy that probably didn't expect to compete that quickly for a job, but he came in and did some really nice things. And so OU chose to roll with Michael for a couple of games just to see what Brent called a body of work. The body of work did not favor Mike. It did result in a win over Auburn on the road, but the Texas game, and then from there on, OU goes back to Jackson Arnold. They move on from Seth Luttrell, and now with this pairing, this is definitely the way that this team's going to look the rest of the way. Jackson Arnold's the quarterback for the future, at least for the time being. We'll see what happens in the transfer portal. I do think it's interesting and relevant. Brent Venables in a press conference said, I mean, my expectation is for Jackson Arnold to be back. I will never know whether or not that was Brent inadvertently trying to get a recruiting advantage over Jackson Arnold in the public sphere, but yeah, I think Jackson Arnold is the guy at Oklahoma, and he's, for what it's worth, man, he's gotten a lot better since that benching. And he did need to be benched, but he's also the kind of quarterback that they have to roll with the rest of the way. And I think he's shown a time or two he deserves that opportunity.
All right, so next up, let's go to receiver. I mean, I know entering the Texas game, basically their top 5 receivers were out. They lost 2 of them before the year. JJ Hester's kind of become maybe their number one healthy guy right now. What's that look like this weekend? I know there was a chance Oklahoma gets a couple of them back.
Yeah, it is potentially the opportunity for this Oklahoma offense to look a lot different. So I know you mentioned the running backs. I want to bring that up really quick because I think it's important as far as the receivers. We're hearing that Javonte Barnes, after his impressive performance the other week, he is questionable, and it's looking more and more difficult to see him taking the field this weekend. And so if OU is without Javonte Barnes, who's arguably been their best player to this point, the health of Deion Burks and Jaleel Farouk, specifically a wide receiver, is paramount. I mean, it feels almost pivotal as far as Oklahoma's chances to go win this game. From what we've heard, I think there is a very real possibility that they give it a go. Jackson Arnold, we just got done talking about him. At one point this year, everyone asked him about Nick Anderson, and Jackson Arnold inadvertently admitted, oh, yeah, we're getting our guy back. And then he ended up playing in the Tennessee game. For what it's worth, Gabe, he kind of gave the same treatment to Deion and Jaleel the other night, where he said, we're going into this game looking at it like we got our guys back. So if Jackson Arnold's word holds true, and it has before, then we are thinking that those two are going to play in this Missouri game. And that would be massive because J.J. Hester's provided some nice plays. Don't think that's who you want being your 1A at wideout. Their arguably second best receiver, maybe their best, is a former preferred walk-on, current preferred walk-on, true freshman out of South Lake Carroll High School here in Texas. His name's Jacob Jordan. They've had to rely on his presence despite being a true freshman PWO, undersized wideout. That's 3 strikes. Yeah, they need those two back in a bad way because the tight end room hasn't necessarily provided much either. So wide receiver is kind of the name of the game for OU going into this one. And if they get those two back healthy, to say that would be huge would be a wild understatement.
All right, so I left the one that to me is the most problematic for Oklahoma for last. I think they gave up 10 sacks in a game earlier this year. I don't really care who's throwing the ball and who's catching the ball. If you can't block, it doesn't work. Got a buddy that covers Ole Miss, and he said after that game, he said, look, Ole Miss's offensive line has some problems and isn't great. It looks like, the 1990s Dallas Cowboys compared to what I saw out of Oklahoma today. What's been the issue there? And is it has it gotten any better, or is that still a problem?
No, this is one of the worst offensive lines in OU football history. Like, bar none. They went back-to-back weeks of setting a program record in sacks allowed. I mean, that doesn't happen, especially when you have an offensive line coach like Bill Bedenbaugh. It's been truly startling to watch on a weekly basis how much they struggle. Health is a big thing, and I don't think it's going to get much better this weekend. Jake Taylor, one of their starting offensive tackles, has been ruled out. They lost Jacob Sexton in that game against Ole Miss where they got out to a pretty good start in the first half. Sexton goes down, and it was, awful the rest of the way when he left the game. They have a lot of transfers playing up front who I don't think are necessarily talented enough to play at this level. They're trying to work in young players like a Logan Howland, for example, who I think could be a pretty good football player in years to come. But right now, if he does start at left tackle, let's say this weekend, I wouldn't blame Missouri at all for targeting him at almost every snap. There's a lot. And I think the other part of this too is the offensive struggles. Do they fall in large part on the offensive line? Sure. Did Jackson Arnold need to make better decisions to kind of bail them out at times? Absolutely. Did Oklahoma need to stop running straight inside zone right into the teeth of a Tennessee defense, for example? Absolutely. They're not a good group right now, and I don't think that they can get much better considering some of the injuries they still face. Mm-hmm. But Oklahoma also has to find a way to help them out. And I think what we've seen over the last few weeks is at least them trying to find a way around that issue. I said the same thing you just said on our podcast earlier today. I don't really care if I'm the quarterback at Missouri. OU fans think that this could be a guaranteed win if Brady Cook's not playing. If OU can't block anybody, I have a hard time seeing them get a path to a victory on the road against Mizzou.
So, it's been a little bit negative on that side of the football, but Oklahoma's defense has kept them in games. Won the Auburn game with a pick six, really played pretty well against Tennessee. just not well enough. How much is it fair to ask this defense to continue to do? I mean, Missouri's last game, their defense actually played pretty well against Alabama, 6-0 with 3 minutes left in the first half. And then they just got put in so many bad situations by the offense that it ended up kind of the dam broke. I mean, Oklahoma's defense, the dam hasn't really broken yet, but is it fair to ask them to keep doing everything they've had to do?
They have to. I mean, fair or not fair, it's the name of the game. I think this is a talented enough group that it's okay to look at them square in the face and say, you're going to have to find a way to win this one. Now, that's a relative term because I don't know that, for example, the report that came out during the Red River game, one of the ESPN sideline reporters shared the fact that Brent Venables was literally going up to the defense and saying, we have to go score a defensive touchdown to try and win this game. Can't do that. But this defense is really good, man. Like when the light switch is on, I don't think people wrap their head around truly how good they can be, because some of the defensive statistics are even not necessarily fair to them. That Tennessee game, for example, they were put in so many bad positions early on and held strong time and again. I mean, they were almost playing the first 3 or 4 possessions right out of the gate on their side of the field or right about the 50 and kept Oklahoma in it. This is a really good group, and I think it ultimately has to be the reason why OU wins this game. But it also, one thing we've kind of talked about on the Oklahoma side for the beat, like, did they feel that pressure? Which I think ultimately leads to some of their mistakes. And I do believe that they know if they don't play a perfect game, Oklahoma doesn't have much of a chance to win. So fair or not, it's going to be the case on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, that same thing, Johnny Walker, Missouri's defensive end after the Alabama game said, we knew we had to score. Well, that's not any path to a victory in an SEC football game, So like best thing, worst thing about the OU defense, like what makes them great? And if there's a vulnerability, what is it?
Yeah, I think the middle pack of this defense, when they are, I mean, lights turned on, they're about as good of a group as you'll find, because that defensive line for Oklahoma, really talented, really deep. They can play even in odd fronts. They run a lot of run stunts. They run a lot of pass rush stunts, and they can excel in a number of different ways. Linebacker, Danny Stutzman's a Sunday player, and then they've got a couple other really good players. And then the safeties, I don't think a lot of the nation knows just how good OU safeties are and can be. That group is all really, really good. And they do a lot of different stuff with them that confuses defenses. The weakness is probably the pass defense, specifically at the cornerback position. Missouri, if they really want to open this thing up, will have to find a way to attack the perimeter of this defense. If you try and win going up the middle, for lack of a better term, against OU, they will wholeheartedly welcome that, right? I think they have guys at corner, if I'm honest, that they really like. Eli Bowen, for example, is a true freshman that's undersized, but man, he is playing his butt off right now. But at the same time, when you're 5'9" on a good day, SEC teams are going to find a way to attack you. And then opposite of Eli Bowen right now, kind of in a rotating door, and it hasn't always necessarily stuck out there at corner. So again, the middle group, all, I mean, really talented players. And Brent likes to confuse defenses with those guys because it's a lot of chess pieces. But they got some checker players right now at corner potentially, and I feel like that could be exposed.
So last one specific to this game, then I've just got kind of a big picture thing for you to finish. But I mean, make a prediction if you want. I never like put people on the spot, but how many points wins this game? Like if either team gets to what number, they feel good about it.
I think it's 13. I mean,
you think might it's that low?
I mean, we just published some intel on our site, and Power Mizzou subscribers can read any site, including ours. So I encourage Mizzou fans to go check us out over there. If Oklahoma's missing potentially their best offensive player, another offensive lineman, and then Mizzou potentially without Nate Noel, Brady Cook. I mean, 13-14 might get it done. I don't know that that's an exaggeration, but what is that number for you? Because I have no idea.
I mean, I think 14 gives you a chance. I think 20 makes you feel really, really good. You know,
Sure.
like if you can get to 20, I don't think both teams get to 20 in this game. So that's kind of 13's possible, but I think if you just told either Venables or Drinkwitz, hey, we're going to give you 20, go take your chances, I think they both probably say okay.
Yeah, man, 14-17 kind of feels like that magic zone, and 20 might be like the dream scenario, you know?
Well, hey, we can root for if it's going to be 14-13 or something, I'm good if the game takes 2 hours and 27 minutes. If it's longer than that, issues.
Yeah, man, late kick. I mean, that at least gets our work done faster, and then we're out of there.
Look, I root for me. I've never hidden that. All right, so last thing, I mean, look, OU sitting here 5-4, and LSU and Bama are next. I mean,
yeah,
I know that playing to be bowl, like Oklahoma doesn't celebrate being bowl eligible.
Right.
Is it important? Does it matter?
100% it does. This is the season for them. And I don't, Brent wouldn't admit it during the press conference this week. But inadvertently, he did kind of admit that a win for this team this weekend at least keeps things together, right? Like, you're preventing the worst case scenario from a program mentality standpoint. And beyond that, you would have the opportunity, as much of a challenge as this season has been, you would have an opportunity to uphold a relative standard, for lack of a better term, but you would also have those extra practices to at least make sure that something like this doesn't happen again next season. So I think for a multitude of different ways, they need 6 wins. They have to, because if they lose this game, and I believe would then finish 5-7. I don't see them beating Alabama or LSU. We're going to some discussion points that no one wants to touch, right? So I think it carries a lot of weight this weekend. I think it's
like, how big did Joe Castiglione make that buyout in the summer? Like that kind of discussion.
Well, and that's the thing too, man. They re-upped his contract over the offseason.
Right.
And I don't want to make this like, I think Brent Venables is a great guy. I think there's no doubt that everyone believes he is a great fit for this job. But the schedule's not getting any easier. And a lot of people are hovering around OU's recruiting class as well. Like, you're going down quite a few rabbit holes if you don't reach 6 wins.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, appreciate your time, Collin. And we look forward to it on Saturday. And I don't know, after all of this, it's probably going to be like 45-42.
Yeah, what do we know, right? I'm looking forward to it. But, hey, man, welcome to the network. Glad you guys are here. You guys do a great job. And I had fun talking some ball, man. I encourage folks to hop over to Sooners Illustrated for more coverage on our end. And until next time, good time crossing over.
For sure. Appreciate it, Collin. We'll talk to you, man. All right, that is Collin Kennedy, Sooners Illustrated. Like you said, guys, if you want to go over to their site, you can read the message board. You can't get on there and post unless, I don't know, you create another email address and pay those guys $9.95 a month. Feel free, I guess. They'll probably welcome it. But you can read all of their coverage, good stuff throughout the week. 6:45 Saturday. Gerard Hamilton and I will be live with you on the postgame show shortly after. Once again, want to remind you, pick up your Yuengling anywhere in Columbia or on the way. Hey, you own coolers. Pick it up in St. Louis, Kansas City, whatever. Just don't open it until you get to Faurot Field. Lager up. Enjoy responsibly our pregame and postgame all year long. Brought to you by America's oldest brewery at Yuengling. Thanks for hanging out this afternoon. We'll talk to you next time.